Imagine being locked away in a cage day after day with no hope of rescue, while the people who are supposed to protect you ignore your cries. This is the tragic and heart-wrenching story of Christian Choate, a young boy whose life was filled with unimaginable suffering at the hands of those who were supposed to love him. This story is about more than just the horror of what happened. It's a powerful reminder of how systems fail the most vulnerable among us. Before we dive into this emotional story, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to support our channel. Stories like this one deserve to be heard, and your support helps us bring them to light. Christian Choate was born into a world that promised him love, security, and a bright future. But instead, his life turned into a nightmare, a story of unthinkable cruelty and betrayal that would shock the world. At just 13 years old, Christian was robbed of not just his life, but also his dignity in a tragic tale that would expose the dark depths of human cruelty. When Christian's parents divorced, his life was upended. In the fallout of their separation, Christian was sent to live with his father, Riley Choate, and stepmother, Kimberly Kubina, in a cramped trailer home in Gary, Indiana. The movie was supposed to be a fresh start, a new chapter for the young boy, but as it turned out, it was the beginning of a nightmare that would only end in tragedy. The Choate household was chaotic, filled with as many as 10 children from different marriages and relationships. Riley Choate, the head of the household, ruled with an iron fist. From the outside, it looked like a typical working-class family trying to make ends meet, but behind closed doors, the Choate home was a prison, especially for Christian. For reasons that would never be fully understood, Christian became the focus of Riley's rage and cruelty. In the beginning, it was subtle. Christian was blamed for things that went wrong in the household, but soon, the punishments escalated, becoming more severe and more frequent. Riley and Kimberly devised a twisted form of punishment for Christian. They confined him to a small dog cage in the corner of a dark, cluttered room. This was not just a temporary punishment, it became Christian's permanent prison. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. The cage was barely large enough for Christian to lie down, and he was given only the bare minimum of food to survive. Christian's days were spent in darkness and isolation. He was forbidden from attending school, playing with other children, or even stepping outside. Instead, he was kept locked away, his only company being the cold metal bars of his cage. The other children in the house could only watch in fear as Christian's health deteriorated, his spirit broken. Christian's diet was restricted to scraps and leftovers, often days old. It wasn't just the physical starvation that tormented him, it was the psychological cruelty. Riley would eat full meals in front of him, taunting the boy as he sat in his cage, too weak to stand. Over time, Christian's weight dropped drastically. By the time of his death, the once lively boy weighed less than 50 pounds, his body reduced to skin and bones. Christian's sister Christina later testified that the abuse was relentless. She described how her brother's once bright eyes became hollow, his laughter silenced. He used to love playing outside, collecting rocks and drawing, she recalled, but after months in that cage, he just stopped talking. It was like he was fading away. But it wasn't just the physical abuse that broke Christian, it was the complete lack of hope. Day after day, he was forced to write in a journal that Riley had given him. In those pages, Christian documented his thoughts, his fears, and his heartbreak. One of his final entries read, "Why doesn't anyone love me? What did I do wrong?" The words of a boy who had lost all hope. On April 4, 2009, Christian's suffering came to a tragic end. That day, Christian had refused to eat, a rare act of defiance that enraged Riley. In a fit of fury, Riley beat Christian mercilessly, delivering blow after blow until the frail boy collapsed. But even as Christian laid lifeless on the floor, Riley showed no remorse. Instead of calling for help, Riley and Kimberly decided to cover up what they had done. They wrapped Christian's small body in a blanket and buried him in a shallow grave behind their trailer, covering it with a layer of concrete. To add a twisted sense of irony, they placed a Bible and a cross next to his body, as if those symbols could somehow absolve them of their horrific actions. With Christian buried, they packed up their remaining children and moved to Kentucky, hoping to leave behind any evidence of their crimes. To anyone who asked about Christian, they simply said he had run away. And for 2 years, this lie went unchallenged. But as the years went by, whispers of what had really happened to Christian began to surface. Teachers, neighbors, and even extended family members had noticed signs of abuse, but had been either too afraid or too uncertain to act. In 2011, acting on a tip, police conducted a search of the property where the Choate family had once lived. What they found would horrify even the most seasoned investigators. Underneath layers of dirt and concrete, officers uncovered Christian's remains. The sight was gruesome. A small, emaciated body buried in a makeshift grave. The entire community was shaken, and questions began to surface. How had a child been subjected to such horrific abuse without anyone stepping in to help? Lake County Sheriff John Bunseich didn't mince words. The system failed this young man, Christian Choate, he said at a press conference. We believe his life could have been saved if information hadn't slipped through the cracks. Once Christian's remains were found, the full horror of what had happened came to light. Riley Choate and Kimberly Kubina were arrested and charged with a slew of crimes, including neglect, child abuse, and obstruction of justice. The stories that emerged from their children during interviews with investigators painted a picture of a household ruled by fear and cruelty. Deputy Prosecutor Michael Woods described the abuse as relentless and heartless. Christian was not just physically starved, he was emotionally starved. He was deprived of love, of care, of basic human decency, Woods said during the trial. While Christian sat in that cage, losing his mind, his father was just a few feet away playing games on his computer. Riley Choate eventually pleaded guilty to a reduced set of charges in exchange for avoiding a jury trial on more severe counts of murder. The plea deal was controversial, but it ensured that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. He was sentenced to 80 years in prison, a punishment that, while severe, could never undo the years of suffering Christian endured. As for Kimberly, she claimed that she had been under Riley's control, too afraid to protect Christian or the other children in the household. In exchange for cooperating with prosecutors, she received a reduced sentence, but many in the community questioned whether her remorse was genuine. After all, she had been complicit in Christian's abuse and had done nothing to stop it. The revelation of Christian's abuse sent shockwaves through Indiana and beyond. For many, it was a sobering reminder of how vulnerable children can be when the systems meant to protect them fail. The case led to renewed calls for reform in the foster care and child protection systems. In the aftermath of the trial, there was a sense of outrage and grief. Christian's story was a stark reminder of the horrors that can happen when children are neglected and forgotten. Community members gathered for vigils, holding candles and placing flowers near the site where Christian's body was found. Strangers wept for a boy they had never met, but whose story had touched their hearts. But the tragedy of Christian Choate did not end with his death. The siblings who witnessed his abuse are still grappling with the trauma. Many of them are in therapy, trying to heal from the horrors they endured. The images of their brother, locked in a cage, starving and alone, are scars that will stay with them for the rest of their lives. Christian's story is one that should never be forgotten. It is a story that exposes the darkness that can hide behind closed doors, the cruelty that can fester in the shadows. But it is also a call to action, a reminder that we must do better, that we must protect those who cannot protect themselves. If you were moved by Christian's story, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others. Let's make sure that Christian's story is heard and that his life, though tragically short, can inspire us to fight for a world where no child is forgotten.